cool. Let's move this over here really quick. And okay, cool. All right. So yeah, kind of like I was just explaining, basically this will be a has many through review. And what we're going to do is we're going to have kind of a university type site where we have a course or courses. We're going to have students, and courses and students will have many of each other. And that's going to be through an enrollment table. So I've already generated the models and I've already generated the controllers, but let's go ahead and just look at the schema really quick, just so we can kind of see the fields that I set up for that. So just, I used James's cat Tinder project as a base for this. So there's like some cat stuff in here, so don't worry about that. But yeah, so I created a courses model, which will be for, generic course or whatever. And it basically just has a name, and that's it. Then I created a students model, and I just gave that a name to keep it simple. And then I created an enrollments model. And this enrollments model, when I generated it, I had it belong to both student and course. And so what that did is it automatically created this student ID column in this table, a course ID column, and then I gave it one extra thing. I gave it a cohort. So either full-time or part-time. It's just a string, but on the front end, I'm just going to kind of make sure I always say full-time or part-time in the same way. And we'll kind of split things out that way. So that's kind of how our models are set up. So what I've done is, or what I'm thinking about doing is basically having a page that when you go to it, it's maybe like an all courses, maybe like a courses index page. So let's say I'm like a university administrator and I'm using this to kind of see what courses are available, who are the students, and then who has enrolled for what course. And so for this courses index page, I, as the user, would like to see all of the courses that are available and then see what students are enrolled in each course. And then if possible, also see what cohort they're enrolled in. So whether they are in the full-time version of that class or the part-time version of that class. So that's what I'm going for. So let's first go to our seeds file and let's create some courses, students, and some basic enrollments. So what I want to do first is I am going to create, let's just call it 10 courses. So I'm not going to really explain too much of this. I mean, I'll talk through what I'm coding, but this is fairly basic. As I get into more complicated things, I'll probably explain a little bit more. But we're going to do 10.times do, and we want to create 10 courses. So I'm just going to say course equals, actually, sorry, no, we're going to say course.create, and then we'll name. And then I already looked this up, but I'm going to say this is like a boot camp school or like a coding school or something. And I'm going to give each course a fake, not a fake, but a randomly generated programming language for that name. So kind of each course will be like a programming language. So, okay. So that's going to create 10 courses for us. They'll have a name, and that's really all we need. Then what I want to do is I want to create some students. And then on top of that, I want to create some enrollments. So let's say we have 10 students. So we'll do 10.times do, and then we want to do student.create, and I'm just going to give it a faker name, and I'm going to have faker name dot first name, like that. And then for each student, let's say I want each student to have 3 enrollments. So they're going to have enrolled in 3 courses. So inside of this 10.times do loop, I'm going to do an additional 3.times do loop, do, and then in here is where I'm going to create the enrollments. So what I want to be able to do is to take the student that I created here, and then, so we call it student, and then access that student's enrollments. Now, I don't have a way currently to access this student, so I'm actually going to assign this a variable. So I'm going to say that every student I create is going to be called student. Then I can call that student here, and I'm going to say, okay, now I want to do student.enrollments.create. Now I can do this student.enrollments because of the relationships that I have set up in my models. So let's just look at that really quick. So go up here. Okay, that's student. Okay, so student has many enrollments. Because I have this here set up in my model, in my seed file, I can do student.enrollments. And that is going to access all of the enrollments that belong to the student that I'm kind of like talking about. So we go back to the seeds. In this case, I'm talking about a student that I just created right here. So I'm going to do student.enrollments.create, and then because I'm doing student, like I'm doing the dot enrollments off of a student, I automatically have access to the student ID. So the only other information that I'm really missing to create an enrollment is a course ID and the cohort field, which is that additional field that I just kind of created. So let's go ahead and do course ID. And in here, what I would like to do ideally is to be able to choose from, to kind of randomly choose from the courses that I have up here that I've already created. And thinking through, okay, how would I choose a course randomly? One easy thing that Ruby allows us to do is to choose from a random, to sample a random value from an array. And what I could do is I could take this course that I created and I could set it equal to a variable. And then I could create an empty array up here. I'm going to call it course IDs. And then what I want to do is I want to pass in the course ID into this course IDs array for every single course that I create. So what I did is I set each course that I create to equal a variable, which I'm just going to call course. And right as soon as that course is created, I'm going to put that course ID into this array. Now, once this is run all 10 times, this array will contain all 10 ID numbers for the course that I created. So it doesn't matter if I rerun my seed file over and over and if the IDs kind of like keep stacking up. Like let's say I were to delete all of the courses and then rerun my database, and the course ID numbers would then be like 11 through 20. Let's say I did it again, the new ones would be like 21 through 30, for example. And what would happen is like what I could do is I could say like, rand 1 through 10 here, because I know that like, okay, the first time I create the courses, the course IDs will be 1 through 10. And maybe I could just in here, just like hard code out, or I could just do like that. And this will just create an array of numbers 1 through 10. But if I rerun this seeds file over and over, then that will no longer be the case. So I want this to be dynamic. I want this to always equal whatever course ID is here, regardless of how many times I run my seeds file. So instead of doing like this rand 1 through 10, what I can do is I can call course IDs and then dot sample. And that is going to look at my course IDs array, which after this runs will have all of the ID numbers for each course. And it's going to just pick a random one from that array. And it's going to set whatever random number is picked to my course ID. Then what I want to do is I want to set my cohort, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to just in here, just create an array, part-time, and then I'm going to just do a dot sample off of this array that I just created. So basically, every student enrollment is going to have the student ID of whatever student was just created. It'll have a random course ID from my courses, and it will randomly be either full-time or part-time for the cohort. So we've got that set up. This all looks pretty good, I think. So I'm just going to put a quick message here, put courses, students, and enrollment seeded. We'll save that. Cool. So that should be good. So let's go ahead and let's just seed this really quick and see if it works. Hopefully it does. Okay, cool. All right, so we seeded our cats as well because that's James's old cat Tinder stuff. That's fine. But we also seeded our courses, our students, and our enrollments. So that's awesome. Okay, so now that we have a seeds file, let's see. Let's kind of go and let's see, what do I want to do? Actually, let's just do a quick thing. So I seeded the file. I want to make sure that this data is seeded correctly. And the most complicated part of this whole thing is probably going to be my enrollments. Like I want to make sure that my enrollments properly got a random course ID and a random cohort. So I'm going to go into my Rails console, and then I'm just going to check my enrollment.all. And I just want to look at this just briefly. All right, so the first one has a student ID of 2, which is true because I should have 3 enrollments per student. So the first student is student ID 2, and let's see, 2 students, student equals, yeah, I think that's correct. 2, and so it has those 3 that has course ID, so random course ID there, and then cohort is randomly chosen part-time through full-time. So I can go all the way down, and I should have 30 enrollments. Almost there. Oh, okay. I know what I did. So I was messing around with this, and I seeded it earlier, but I didn't destroy it. So what I want to do is I also want to do, so I reseeded over my previously seeded data. So now I have like 2 sets. So what I actually want to do is when I seed, I want to course.destroy all. I want to student.destroy all, and I want to enrollment.destroy all. Save that. Let's go back here. Exit Rails DB. See, let's rerun this really quick. Update untable courses, Rails DBC, foreign QR, okay. Rails untable enrollments. Courses, violate form straight through untable enrollments. Oh, I think I need, let's see, where's my my model? So course has many enrollments. So I want to do a dependent destroy on that, and that should get rid of the enrollments. So I don't think I need to do that. I think I just need to do that one. So save. Let's do Rails DB seed. Okay, cool. That time it worked. Yeah. So it was kind of getting confused because I was destroying my courses and I was destroying my students. And then I had a whole bunch of enrollments, but I no longer had any IDs for courses and students. And so my enrollments were getting really confused. So instead, I dropped the destroying the enrollments from here, and I made it happen so that whenever I destroy a course, it destroys any enrollments that are attached to it. So that's cool. So let's just check, make sure our stuff is there. Do enrollment.all. So we should have 30. Oh yeah, it's going to be like way more. So like 90. So we should have 120. It should go up to about ID 120-ish. Just make sure. Perfect. Okay, there we go. So we have 30 enrollments, which is exactly what we want. So hit Q, exit. Perfect. Okay, cool. So now our data is seeded. It looks good. That's great. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to kind of start to stub out that page that is going to kind of be my courses index page. That not only do I want to just have all the courses and the data that's specifically attributed to the courses, which is just the course name, I also want to see the enrollments for each course. And I want to see the student name for each course. And we can do that using some custom methods in our models, but we'll get to that in just a second. So, all right, so I kind of just stubbed this out like pretty briefly. It's like very short. That's fine. Let's see. Let's go ahead and just get this working so we can at least see something. So let's do that. I'm just gonna put this in a fragment. Do P, and let's do hello, save. Cool, all right, there we go. So I also updated my nav bar and my route, my front end route, so that I have this little my courses page that'll take me to my_courses. And then it's going to render this component here. So there we go. All right, so this is now working. That's great. So what I want to do now is I am going to want to do an Axios call. And I want to get basically all of my courses. But not only do I want all of the courses, I also want all of my enrollment data for each course. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use that use Axios on mount hook that you guys have been using. I really like that hook. I think it's actually really cool. Yeah, we didn't use that when I went to the cohorts, but I think it's like pretty awesome. So, okay. So here's our use Axios on mount. And what you do for this, basically, you just pass in the route that you want. So cool. So we know that for this Axios call, we're going to want to do the index Axios call. We're going to want to get all of the courses. So let's come over here and let's look at our routes. So we'll find our courses. And okay, let's look for the courses index, boom, API/courses. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and do API/courses. Now this should do the API call. It'll run a GET request against our index method inside of our courses controller. That's what this is saying. Like, this is the URL that we're going to put into our Axios call. This is the verb we're going to use for the Axios call. This is just telling us that it's part of our courses model path. And this is saying that this is the controller it's going to hit, and then the hashtag, and then whatever's after the hashtag is going to be the method it's going to hit. So cool. So this is going to go and it's going to hit our index method in our controller. But we hit refresh. Cool. So, I mean, we don't know if this worked or not, because actually we know it didn't work, because over here in our console, we can see that it tried to do it, but it says 404 not found. So that is because if we go to our courses controller, we don't have anything inside of here. So that is problem number one. So it's trying to look for our index method in the controller, but we don't have that here. So let's go ahead and get that set up. So we do def index and cool. So normally, if you're going to be doing just your standard index call, trying to get all of one model, you're going to do your render JSON, and then you're going to do usually the model name. So in this case, it'll be course and .all. So this .all, this is just kind of built into Ruby on Rails. In fact, it's built into the application controller. And if you really want to be more specific, it's built into the action controller, which is what the application controller kind of comes from. But suffice it to say, if you just want to think about it simply, like course.all, it's just like this .all, that's just kind of built in. We don't have to worry about it. But what this does is this just grabs all of the info for our courses. So it grabs this data for each course that we have, and that's it. So we have this set up. We hit save. That should be good. Let's go ahead and go back to here, and let's do a refresh. And cool. Okay. So you can see that we're no longer getting that error down here. That's cool. So if we wanted to just kind of like briefly look at that data and see what that looks like, let's go ahead and just do a send here. Okay. So this is Postman. I don't know if you guys remember Postman. I use Postman all the time. I think it's a really, really good tool to use because it lets me just kind of on the fly visually see my data down here, which I love to be able to see. So we just put in that URL that we wanted to use for our index for courses. So, you know, got it from right here. Then we got our verb here for get. So you want to make this a get. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff, but we'll just do a get, hit send, and then voila, we got our data here, which is awesome. So these are all of our courses. And I believe we should have 10 courses. Yeah, cool, 10 courses. So 41 ended like what, 50? Yeah, cool. All right, so here's all of our courses, and all of our courses have a random programming language name. I don't even know any of these, like Algol W and like Maxima, XPL, Tinker, Chuck, Cobol Script, and somehow did that twice. That's amazing. Cool. There's like 10 million programming languages out there. So, but yeah, so that's looking great. But what we want to do is I would love to be able to do this Axios call on my index, but get a whole lot more info than just this. Because right now, if we have this, we have what, the ID number and the name of each of our courses. And so we could come over to here, you know, we could map over that and we could see the name of each of our courses. Like, that's kind of cool, I guess. But what I would really like to do is see a lot more. I want to see each course, but then I want to see the students for each course. And we can do all of that with just one Axios call. So let's kind of start looking at that and seeing what we can do to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my course model right here. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a custom method. And this method is going to go into my index method in my controller. So I'm going to, instead of calling course.all, which is just your basic standard index call, I'm going to do course dot like something custom that I want to have here. And let's just go ahead and say, let's just call it course.all with enrollment and students. So we want to do an Axios call that's going to get all of the course data, but we also want to get all of our enrollments and all of the students. So we're calling that here, but now we have to define it over here. And you can see that I'm calling this method, all with enrollments and students, off of the model. And so I know that this method over here is going to be a class method. So to do a class method, you have to first start out by saying self. So it's basically referring to itself, the course model. It's not referring to an individual course itself, like an instance of the course, but the course model as a whole. So we're going to do def self.all. We're just going to name it exactly what we had in our controller. Get rid of that. And hit enter, and there we go. So we have our definition there. So in here, what I want to do is, the first thing is I know that I'm going to want to get all the courses. So I'm just going to go ahead and say courses equals course.all. Cool. That's simple enough. Then let's go ahead and return courses. Let's actually call this courses and courses. Okay, cool. So what I did right here, I defined this method. It's a class method, and so it's going to be called on the class itself. And we know that this is a class method because we're starting off with the self dot notation and then the name. We're finding all of the courses, then we're returning an object that's going to have an ID, a key of, not an ID, a key of courses, and that's going to equal all of our courses, which will be an array of all of our courses. So basically what I did is I manually just now coded what this standard method is doing right here. So in the back end, inside of the active record, I think it is in Ruby on Rails, the .all method is coded and defined somewhere. It's part of Ruby on Rails, so we can just use it out of the box. But it probably looks almost identical to this. Like this .all is doing what this is doing right here. So we want our method to do that. We want to have the .all kind of part of our method, but we want to do some extra stuff. So this took care of that first part. We're going to get all the courses. I'm going to set it to courses, and that's fine. The next thing that we want to do is we want to see all of the enrollments and all of the students for each course. So I'm going to create a new variable called course enrollments. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take this. So this, I know that this is all my courses because I set it to equal course.all. And I'm going to map over that. So I have this thing called course enrollments. I'm just grabbing all my courses from here and I'm mapping over it. And because I'm mapping over each of my courses, I'm just going to call it course because I know that like each time my map goes over it, that object that it sees that it's looking at is going to be a course. So cool, we're going to do that. And then what I want to do in here is I want to return basically a new object. And in this new object, let's just say we want to have the course data. So cool. So we'll have the course data inside of here. That's fine. But we also want the course enrollment. So I'm going to set a new key. And now we want, so this here is going to equal course. Course is going to equal whatever's in our schema. So it'll have like a name, it'll have an ID, it'll have the created by table and like the updated that table, which you use sometimes, but so that's fine. But then for the course enrollments, this is where we want to have all of our enrollment and student data. And I want this to be an array that maybe looks something like this, that maybe has like, the enrollment ID that I can get, the student ID. Like I just want this to have a ton of information. I want to have the course ID, course name, cohort, student name. That's an important one. I want this right here. I want course enrollments to equal an object that just has all of this data for me. And so what I can do is, because each course, and this is based off of how we set up our models, and you can see it right up here, because each course has many enrollments, we can access our enrollments using dot notation. So I can say course, because we're right now on an individual course, and each course is going to have many enrollments. So I can say course dot enrollments, and then I want to map over those enrollments. So we're going to say enrollment. Then we're going to hit enter. Cool. So basically what I'm doing is I'm setting course enrollments here to equal whatever comes out of this mapping function that I'm doing. And this mapping function, I want it to return an object that looks like this stuff that I just wrote down here. So let's just kind of go down. So we know we're going to want the enrollment ID. And so what's the enrollment ID going to equal? So we're looking at this. We know that we're mapping over each enrollment inside of the course that we're on currently. And so we know that we can do, and that enrollment is set to equal enrollment. And we know that each enrollment is going to have an ID. Like if we look at the schema, we can see that each enrollment has, actually, sorry, it's not even in the schema, but it's just built in. Like every model has an ID. Like if we go to our Postman, and like back when we just did our normal all courses get index call, we can see that each of these has an ID, and we could do an index call for each of our models, and each model would have a unique ID. So we know that we can take our enrollment and just access the ID like that. So we can do enrollment and then enrollment ID. Cool. All right, so we also want the student ID. So the student ID, what we can do is we can do enrollment dot student ID, because we know that each enrollment has a student ID. This is something we can see in our schema. So enrollments have a student ID, they have a course ID, they have a cohort. So we can do enrollment dot student ID and get that. We can do enrollment dot course ID and get that. We can do enrollment dot cohort and get that. And that's going to come, from whatever value is put in there when we created it, whether it's created in our seeds file here, or whether we down the road create a form that allows us to create enrollments, and whatever value put into the form. That's what this dot notation allows us to do, is to access each of those individual attributes. Okay, so we know that. So we also want to get the course ID. So we know that each enrollment is going to have a course ID, and it's going to be course underscore ID. We also wanted the course name. So, okay, how do we get the course name? Because course name is not part of the enrollment model. The enrollment model just has the course ID, the student ID, and the cohort, which is the attribute that I added. I have a little typo here. So if we look at the course name, I'm just kind of looking at my code. I'm like, okay, where can I access that? One quick thing that I see here is I'm first mapping over courses. And so I have access to each individual course. I have access to the course that we're mapping over the enrollments from. So I can just use that word here. This is basically like a variable name. And this is going to refer to the course that we're on. And I can just do course dot name, because course has a name. And that's going to be the course that we're currently on. So I can do course name equals course dot name. For cohort, just cohort, yeah. This will just be enrollment dot cohort. And then for student name, this one is going to be very similar to, let's see, where was it? I think it's something that we did a little before this. So if we do enrollment dot, oh yeah, I think it was in our seed file. So because enrollments belong to students, we can also use dot notation to kind of get into that relationship. So we can do enrollment dot student dot name here. And this is going to allow us to access the student name right here. So now we have a courses variable that's going to be set to course.all, and we have a course enrollments variable that is going to equal the course data for each course, and it's going to have a course enrollments key. It's going to be equal to a bunch of objects for each enrollment, and each enrollment is going to have this data if an enrollment exists. So finally, what we want to do is we want to return not just our courses, but we also want to return the enrollments. Cool. So we're going to say enrollments, and we're going to set that equal to the course enrollments. Okay. So let's see, self.all with enrollments and students. Let's go to our controllers, self.all with enrollments and students. Okay, awesome. So we just did a lot of coding. There wasn't really a surefire way to test this while we were going, but we're done now. Let's save this and let's rerun our index inside of Postman and test to make sure that this works. So we're expecting to get something that has course. It'll have all the course data. Then if there are enrollments, it'll say enrollments and then have a whole bunch of objects for each of those enrollments. So, and we know that should happen because we stubbed out this function here, but we're now calling that in our index controller. So in our routes, whenever we do a get call on this URL, it's going to go to the index method in our courses controller, which is the index method here in our courses controller, and it's going to do whatever is in there. We could make this anything, you know, but in this case, instead of doing course.all, we're doing course.all and then all the extra stuff that we added. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to Postman and let's run this. Let's see if it works. Okay, cool. So let's just kind of check this out. I think this worked. So, all right, so what we should be expecting is an object. So it's big ol', so we got this object here. So here's the opening curly, there's the closing curly. Here's the opening curly, and if we go all the way down, there's the closing curly brace. So that's what that is. Okay, cool. Then we should have a key in this object called courses. All right, so we got that. Then this courses key should be set to all of our courses. Okay, so courses, we've got an array of objects. Cool. Each of these objects is one of our courses. And so, you know, this is basically our normal courses.all call. So we know that the ID, name, and then the created updated info for each of our courses. Cool. All right, so we should have, what, like 10 courses? Cool. When that ends, that object or array should end, and then we should have a new thing, a new key value pair in this returned object. We should have a key called enrollments, and then we should have that set to equal to the course enrollment. So, okay, we got the enrollments key here. That's going to be equal to an array of objects, and that array of objects is going to be equal to this stuff. So what I did is I returned the course again. Okay, cool. So that's fine. So this is just a duplicate of this data. I don't need to have it duplicated, but I did. It's not a huge deal. But then I should have a course enrollment that's going to have an object for each of our enrollments that looks like this. So we have course enrollments, and cool, here we go. All right, so we can see here for this course, Algol W, whatever language that is, we have 4 enrollments, and it has the information that we were seeking. So enrollment ID, student ID, course name, cohort, student name. Cool. All right. So we can go down and we can see the course data for each course and the enrollments for each of those courses. So this looks pretty good. It looks like all of our courses have enrollments, which wasn't guaranteed because of our seed file, and I set it up to be very random. So it could have ended up that one of our courses didn't have enrollments, and that could still be the case. I didn't look at this like super closely, but yeah. So now this Axios call is like huge, and not just big as in like has a lot of data, but also very meaningful. Like this has, by doing this one Axios call, we don't just have this data, you know, just this basic stuff for our courses. We have access to all of this stuff. So if we go back to our component here, where we're doing this call, at this point, we've done the call, we get back this data, and data here is set to equal all of this. So now we have access to all of this by just doing one Axios call, which is really cool. So let's start kind of laying out how this would look. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to set up some of just the quick, just really quick, the loaders and error handling that you guys use in your use Axios on mount. So I'm not really going to talk through this. This is pretty not basic, but you guys have probably done this a million times and have a lot of examples of this. I'm going to get this stubbed out really quick. Error message, I think is the error message, and then you get pass an error as props here, and that takes care of that. All right, cool, sweet. All right, if return spinner, I don't want that, but I do want that. Okay, cool. All right, so now I don't want this hello there. That's what I did have. It just said hello, you know, right here. What I want instead is I want to list out all of my courses. So let's go ahead and look at doing that. So I want to call a basically a method that I'm going to call render courses. And this is going to basically render the JSX that I want. So let's go ahead and define that up here. So we'll do const render courses equals that. Okay. So what I want to do in here is I want to take my data that contains all of this stuff. And the first thing I want to do is I just want to show all my courses. So I want to map over my courses and display that information. So let's go back to our browser here. See, there's like a weird, oh yeah, we don't need that. There we go. Okay, cool, that's fine. All right, so yeah, so we got render courses, and okay, so inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to map over our data. So we're going to say return, and we'll do data dot enrollments dot map arrow function that. Okay, so what I did is I did data dot enrollments dot map. So I kind of ignored the courses part here. So I'm ignoring this part because if you remember, I duplicated this data inside of my enrollments. So I'm not going to worry about that. Like this data here is duplicated right here for each course. So I went straight from data, and I didn't do data.courses. I went and drilled into data.enrollments. And I want to map over each of these. So that's what I'm doing there. So, oops. What just happened? Let me see. I don't know what I just pressed. That's really weird. Pages, my courses. Okay, cool. There we go. I think it just like refresh the page or something. Okay, so render courses. Okay, so I'm mapping over my data.enrollments and setting that to C. So I have to have two return statements for mapping in React. So we'll do return here, and then I'm going to say, I'm going to set up my fragments really quick. And then I want to do a H2, and I want to have the course name. So I'm going to do c.course.name. Okay, so let's look at our Postman. So what I did is I went to data, which is this entire data set, dot enrollments, okay? Then I'm mapping over this. So each, so like this is going to be one instance. So this is going to be one instance of C. This will be another instance of C. And it's going to keep going down all the way down, all the way through all of our courses. So I'm in data.enrollments, okay? So here, we're in the first one, so C. Then I did C.course, okay? So I didn't want to go into C.course enrollments. I want to do C.course. Then I did C.course.name. And that's going to give me the name of each of these courses. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's check and make sure that that works. Okay, cool. There we go. So we can see that now we have all of our courses listed out here, which is cool. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is let's render out some of our enrollment data. So I'm going to do render enrollment data C.course enrollment. And then I'm going to do an HR here, which is a horizontal rule. And just so we don't get this error back here, let me just define this really quick and I'll talk through what I just did. Enrollment data equals, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. Boom, boom. All right, save. Okay, cool. Get our data. Okay, all right. So what I did is we're getting our course name here. Then I want to render out some additional data. I want to render out the data that is in here. Like I want to show like maybe the student name for each course, maybe the cohort. I probably don't want to show this information, but you know, I might need access to it sometime. But I want to show some of this data, and that's going to involve another .map. And I just don't want to get a whole lot of .maps inside of one function, so I'm going to just call another function and then just break that out into here. So I'm passing this function some data. I'm passing it C.course enrollments. So we're already inside of our enrollments, and each enrollment is going to be called C, like this. And instead of doing C.course, I'm going to do C.course enrollments because this is the data that I want access to. I'm going to pass in this as an argument. Then in here, I'm just going to call it enrollment data inside of my function. So now what we want to do is we want to map over that enrollment data. So we can say return enrollment data.map, and then I'm going to call this E for, I don't know, enrollment or something, one instance of enrollment data. And I'm going to return some JSX. And so set up some fragments here. And then let's say inside of here, we just want to show the student name. So we'll do P and we'll do E.student name. All right, so I know that this is E.student name because we got our enrollment data. Each piece of enrollment data is going to be called E here. So we can say, okay, we're now in this object. So we can say E dot, what's the student name? It's student underscore name. Cool. All right, so we can do that. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's go back to our browser. Okay, cool. So now we have all of our courses and we have the name of each student that is enrolled in each course. So that's cool. What we could also do is we could say maybe that, and then we could do E dot, I think cohort is in here. We could do E dot cohort, cool. And we could see, okay, which cohort, which version of the class did they sign up for? So let's do a save. Why is it E dot cohort? I don't know what that is. That's okay though. I think my ESLint is like making that happen. I think that won't do anything. But yeah, okay. So now we have the student name and the cohort that they're in. So that's awesome. All right. So basically, we did one Axios call. We did that Axios call right there. And that gave us all of this information here. And so now, with this one Axios call on this one React component, we can drill down and gain access to and display all of this data. And we set all of that up inside, of our, interesting. So whenever like my thing closed a minute ago, that's weird. It only opened back up my client folder. So I just have that. I think I have something else open over here. Let me go. Okay, cool, this works. All right, cool. This is an old version I was working on earlier, but okay. But this is how we set up our Axios call to be able to do this. It's inside of our course model right here. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty powerful. And eventually, we're going to kind of get away from, setting like getting information across various tables using just Ruby. And we're going to start using SQL, which is really helpful. But yeah, but this is, this is a perfectly legitimate way to do things. But yeah, do you guys have any questions for me about anything that we kind of like just went over? It was kind of a lot. It can start to feel a little complicated, but when you really think about it, it's not too crazy. It's really just trying to visualize, okay, like where is my data? How can I get access to it? What do I need to do to like, when I do my Axios call, this final return down here, like how do I need this data to look? How can I make that data kind of be structured the way that I want? And practicing doing this is like really, really helpful. Like I haven't done something like this in a while. And so when I was kind of just preparing for this review, I just kind of sat down. I was like, okay, like I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to show a page that has the courses that also grabs the student names and like, okay, what do I need to do to like set that up? And it was a really good exercise for me, even like where I'm at, to just figure this out and work through it. And I feel like I kind of like leveled up, just some of my knowledge, just doing this one practice. So I definitely recommend practicing doing this, just playing around, trying to like create views in React where you're like, okay, like I want to get this information. How can I make that happen? I think that's really, really, really good practice. But yeah, do you guys have any final questions for me or anything before we end the review? Okay, cool. I'm gonna go and stop.